Welcome to State and Local. I'm Anne Marie Battistone on NCTV. I have my final interview with candidates for the Select Board. With me is Paul Burns today, and I'm going to mention that Paul has a distinguished background. He graduated from Boston Latin School, which was back when it was really Latin school.
Well, that's true. Thank you for having me, Anne Marie.
Oh, you're welcome.
And the reason I guess that's doubly relevant is that you were a teacher there
I was. We were
quite
there at
some
the same time,
right?
yeah.
So I never had you for Spanish or what was the
Italian
other? Italian. But I have a great love for the school, and I think it sent me on a trajectory that I'm thankful for in life, because of the school. So thank you for mentioning it.
It was a great place. So now you're going to run. Have you ever run for any positions before?
Nope.
But you're going to run now. And so what motivated you to take the plunge, really? I mean, if you've never done before.
Yeah, a couple of things, and let me give you the quick background. And I'm a late entry to this race. I decided very close to when nomination papers were due. I was like, I have to do something. I've seen some things going on in this town that make me kind of wonder if it's being managed as well as it can be. A couple of years ago, I'll tell you a quick story about what got me, even started remotely in politics. I was sitting outside. I live over on Union Street, which is a relatively busy street. And sitting outside there on the front porch, just enjoying the day, when a car crashed head-on into a utility pole right across from my house. And it was one of the loudest sounds that you ever would have heard. Obliterated the front of the car. The woman who was driving was okay, thankfully, but Union Street is a street without sidewalks. And if I was thinking, I've always been a little concerned. My wife will go to the commuter rail. Lots of people walk that street with, taking their life into their hands. And I thought, if this had been a person instead of a utility pole, then that person wouldn't have survived, I don't think. So I convened a meeting shortly after that with the chief of police, the director of the DPW, the town administrator at the time, and a neighbor joined me, and we just had a chat at a cross street about what we might be able to do to improve public safety on Union Street.
Very proactive.
Well, I mean, once you have your eyes opened, to then try to close them again, for me that's impossible. So. I think what had happened was at that meeting we talked about maybe doing things like a sidewalk, which ultimately would be too expensive.
Very expensive.
But just some greater police presence, or maybe even putting one of those speed calming signs on the street. And the chief at the time said that they had submitted a request for grant funds to purchase one of those. I think it was the tune of $3,500. But they didn't have a lot of hope because I think that the grant office in Massachusetts doles out funds depending on what they deem as the need for the town, and typically it goes to
the poorer towns.
It goes to the poorer towns, if you will, or to the towns that see a great degree of density. And so I said, would it help if I'm a great letter writer? I can write a letter to this office, and police chief was like, no, they don't do it that way. And I did it anyways, Anne Maria. I found the email address to submit, a grant request, and I wrote a whole one-page letter about, how dangerous it's become with things like people using Waze or just, coming through our streets
Phones
that may have previously not. And so I said, please give us these funds so we can get this. And wouldn't you know that they deviated from the past apparently, and they gave us the funds to get that sign.
See?
So
you're a person of conscience.
They never said, and I don't blame them, but they never said we got this because of you, But if I lended any kind of additional voice to getting that, I felt it was something that I can do. So I guess to answer your question, if there are things that I can do in town here, I have a background in supplier management. I've worked 22 years in that field, and that is all about, getting the most out of your suppliers that you're working with. So I come from 22 years in corporate America. You have to do bids all the time. You have to do contracts. You have to do financial analysis. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about getting exactly what you hope to for the money that you're paying. And if you're not, figuring out what kind of corrective action needs to be taken. So
now, where did you go to college?
I went to Babson College, and then I obtained my MBA at UMass.
in UMass Amherst.
That's right. Yeah.
Very good. That's the flagship.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, unfortunately, it seemed like my actions to improve safety on my street were a bit of a flash in the pan. There was a great degree of police presence and pulling people over, and you see it occasionally now, but it seemed very reactionary. I would contact my select board and said, can we do something to improve safety? They would then contact the police, and you'd see for a short period of time some police presence, and theoretically pulling people over, improves safety. But
you never actually did contact the select board about that, did you?
I did, yeah. And to their credit, specifically, I'm talking about Kevin. He's always been responsive and hearing me out. He's very good at that. But in terms of lasting change on the street, I'm not sure that I can point to anything. And wouldn't you know, Anne Marie, that that pole had to be replaced, all right? I think it was 5 months after that pole was replaced, a second car, it hit the replacement pole. So there is a definite risk to public safety. I mean, I just hope that no one is ever harmed by getting hit by a car coming down that street.
Is there something about that particular section of road that's...
I've asked myself that too.
Some kind of a sight line or something?
Well, it does actually go in a little bit of a hill right there. The pole is very close to the street, and that street was recently repaved, which we want, right? I mean, we want our streets to be repaved, but I think some drivers see it as an opportunity to really open it up and go, much faster than would be safe, So you couple that with distracted driving, and it's a recipe for disaster. So that, I got a little dismayed by no long-term progress. That sign that they did end up buying did have a presence for a time on Union Street, which was nice to see, but it's meant to be mobile, it needs to be recharged, and it moves around town, or so they say. Other towns, they have these ones that are permanently wired. They're either, solar powered or direct from the utility electricity. This one has a battery that so it has to be taken down. It seems like not an ideal solution, and I want to do what I can to help the town in its various matters, and I think that public safety is an important one.
Well, and this is me now speaking. I would be very dismayed to think that there was not one word, and it's almost as if, we said it couldn't be done, and now you've proven that it can be done in the right way.
I can't honestly point to the fact that it was my letter that was the tipping point, but I think that I made a coherent case for why we needed it, and we got a sign at the end of the day. And I'm not in this for the glory, Anne Marie. This is not why. I know a lot of politicians get into politics to seek the glory. I never really saw this as a path for me. I mean, but when you sit back long enough and you say, geez, in this town, this, and this. I mean, one of the things I was hoping to discuss with you was my concerns over this expensive fire station project, and what's going on here. But I'd be remiss if I didn't connect that to the police/fire station project that was voted on several years ago, had the funds raised, and in my estimation, I mean, I think that the town has given us reasons, but in my estimation was ultimately mismanaged, to the tune of overspending of over $2 million on the police station, leaving not enough funds for the fire station improvements that were,
correct.
And so I say, what's going on, in town hall or these different departments that have had a hand in this, and I just, I think that it's time to get somebody in there who's going to, hold people accountable and build and maintain the trust in our citizens so that, when we say that we're going to raise funds for something like this, we're actually going to get it done and not come hat in hand several years later for a very expensive fire station project that I honestly can't say that everything that's built into that is ultimately needed,
It's true.
It's going to be a considerable increase to our taxpayers.
But what is the actual amount? They're saying for the average house it's going to be another $500 a year?
Yeah, I think
Which is, I don't know what
that's
the
what they've
average
been
house...
saying, 500 something a year, and then there's an increase in the operating expenses. There's going to be, more things to keep up with, I guess, with the new station. So in total, I think they were citing, when I most recently heard it, $600 a year to the average taxpayer. And of course, some people will be paying more if they have a higher, valued home.
Now, I'm just going to, in terms of writing letters and so forth, tell me, I believe you wrote something, gave a response to one of the articles in the paper. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Norfolk Rentham News, I guess a few months ago, reached out to the fire station building committee and said, when the time comes, we'd like to do a story on this project. And I was tuned into that meeting, heard that, and, not wanting that to become a puff piece, reached out to them and said, would you consider inserting perhaps an alternate, not necessarily an opposing view, but just some, not just something where it's a description of the project by the fire station and everything else. I think that it's important to have different perspectives.
And to go deeper.
And, to their credit, they said they would reach out when the time comes, and she did. And I provided a written response which basically said that at the cost of this fire station, it's going to be a heavy burden to bear for many of our citizens, especially during an economic downturn. And,
yes.
And the town needs to consider an alternate solution. And that was at the tail end of that article. That should, in paper form, be hitting mailboxes around today. It came out on the 28th of December.
Maybe we can get a link in case, because sometimes people just
that's a good idea.
Put a link up to that article in its entirety, and then was there a response to your?
Yeah,
comment?
There was at the end. I think that, and I had not previously heard this. What I've heard all along in this fire station project was, because there's a design firm that's been retained to help with this, and that it's basically this solution, no other solution. It's what they have designed. Which I voiced as a major concern when I spoke to the chair of the committee back in October for their open house, and he said that this is pretty much it. And I said, you don't have a plan B? And according to what got inserted at the end of that article, I think plan B will be to, use whatever funds remain to essentially acquire a newer trailer to keep the firefighters more comfortable. Obviously, everybody knows that the conditions in that current trailer aren't great. And, at the end of the day, Anne-Marie, I mean, who doesn't love firefighters, right? They're there to protect us.
That's right.
We want to take care of
job.
them. And I'm not somebody who's against firefighters.
No.
It'd be crazy to.
No, and no one should try to allege that either.
No, but at the same
False
time,
flag.
These things that are very expensive public works projects, they have to be weighed and balanced and done carefully. Do we really need to spend, $22 million to get this done? By the way, a lot of that has there's a fair amount of contingency dollars just built into that project.
Yes. Yeah. Jim Leon mentioned that. I asked him, I don't know if I mentioned on the air, but it's quite lenient.
I think it's over $1.5 million of just contingency funds. So, at the end of the day, do we need this two-story building that's, going to cost this much? And this is coming on the heels, or preemptively on the heels of, we're going to be looking at an expansion for the Freeman Kennedy School.
Correct.
Which now a taxpayer is going to have to weigh how much extra can I really absorb, And education, I think it's appropriate that we kind of kick things off with that, because I truly value education. And we need to take care of our children in this town, give them the very best education that we can. So, are we going to have to potentially put that Freeman Kennedy expansion off because this has been moved forward?
Or just tax more and more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been my impression that everybody wants the best here. The biggest equipment and the finest this and that and the other thing. And I just think it's reflected in this whole thing with the fire station. I mean, they could build a nice a one-story house back there for $600,000 or $700,000. I mean, it wouldn't be a conventional house. It would be a setup for like a dorm type of a building. But they could scratch that trailer and build a whole house back there.
Right. I mean, I think look, like I said, everybody loves firefighters. We need them. And it's unfortunate that our sort of sentiments about public safety are being played to in order to try to get this done.
Correct.
I think it's important to remember that in order to succeed as a town, we need to make sure that we have the right kind of fiscal discipline for the long term. And there's something to be said for when a board or anybody comes to a town meeting like this with a proposal, if it seems like it's too high, I think it's something to be said for sending them back to the drawing board. Sending a message, because if every time something like this occurs,
Exactly.
and all we hear is that we've spent months designing this and it's the cheapest that it could possibly be, if all we ever do is rubber stamp these things and make them go forward, then how do we truly know that these things are coming as cost competitive as they truly can be?
And I think, again, I meant to say specious, not false flag, is something completely different. But I mean, people come up with these arguments that aren't true to discredit. This has happened in the past, to discredit people that were concerned about value and say, well, you're just as saying, it doesn't even need to be said that we all love the firemen. But I think when people hear something they don't like, they search around for some ulterior motive that the person has, and it's so disingenuous, and it's just,
I mean, again, like I said, I'm not getting into this for the glory of being a politician. I think that what I can potentially bring to the table is something that's very necessary for this town, which is I'm not going to get in there and be a bull in a china shop. I think that we probably do have people in town hall that each in their own way contribute, and I look forward to meeting with all of them and figure out what's working and what's not. But at the same time, I'm also not a go along to get along kind of person. I'm going to be getting in there and looking at our expenses, and not just at high level. I mean, I'm going to be looking at detailed expenses, and if we're not managing things correctly in this town, that's going to change, to the extent that I have anything to say about it. And I also want to do other interesting things. I mean, I've read about towns that, honestly, town meeting is difficult for people people are busy, they've got kids. It's difficult for them to allocate the time, but I honestly believe that their voice still needs to be heard, and heard in an effective way. I've read about other towns that do town surveys, and that's something that I'd like to explore doing, so that we can actually capture what the important, what people consider important, and then, bake that into how we want it. Maybe there are things that we're not thinking about that are important to the town, and doing that, and then report on it. One of the things I'd like to see more is
very logical.
Is more of a end of the year, kind of a state of the town. What did we do this year? And let's be honest about things. What maybe things didn't go so well. We've got a library that's springing leaks all that often. Why is that? What are we going to learn from our mistakes? And let's be honest with the townspeople.
So those haven't been fixed as far as you know?
I think they're actively. I think that it happened once before, to my knowledge, and now it's happened at a frozen pipe yet again. And I was over there the other day to get some books, and they've got Service Master over there doing all sorts of work. So it was quite a disaster. I think the library was closed to the public. But why is that? And what's the extra expense that we're incurring as a town? So.
Yeah, I mean, there's this there's this huge. There was, I imagine it still exists, and it was a $50,000 slush fund, my language, in facilities. With the argument that I remember at a meeting, well, we've got to have money to pay. But when people come in, Service Pro or whoever, they don't hold their hand out and say, give me the money right now, so that you have to have all this money held, in this fund. But I mean, it's, now, I read also that there are a lot of the fire stations are a category 4 in terms of a lot of green features that's made it expensive. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think we're mixing a couple of things. I think category 4 speaks to the degree to which a building needs to withstand hurricanes and that sort of thing.
Yes, that's right.
Because it needs to be there in order to serve the public. Yes. So they do need to build these buildings to a certain durable standard.
Yeah.
And so presumably that is, influencing the cost to go up. And I believe they are also designing a lot of green features into this.
Yes.
I haven't heard anything about, when you're talking about going green, everybody kind of looks at that as, well, that's a good thing, we need to do that. But these going green methods often come with a higher cost as well.
Definitely.
And there should be some kind of a payback for that, so that when we're talking about when they come to these meetings and they say, you know, and this is going to be all sorts of green stuff and good windows and everything else, but, you know, what's the payback period for that, you know? So
have you heard anybody say anything about trying to get some grants for this, especially regarding these green features?
I have not, no, but I think that's something that definitely should be explored before, you know, coming to the town for the total sum of the building.
Now, what would one have to do to find out? You would know how to do that, wouldn't you? What would someone have to do to find that out? They would have to go to the state and then...
My understanding is that our person who runs the building department is in charge of, and this is something that I obtained through third-hand information, so if he's not, then forgive me. But, you know, he looks into the grants that are available for...
Is that Bob Bullock?
Rich McCarthy?
Oh, yes, yes, it is Rich, yes,
yeah,
correct.
So again, that was told to me, and Rich never said it firsthand, but if we've got somebody who's going to be looking into the availability of grants, that's a good thing. And I don't know, you know, what's available here for this fire station, presumably something.
Because I remember him talking about some sort of a grant for that building where the dance studio is, and it had to do with permeable versus impermeable surfaces and using this sort of like a type of a turf so that the water would run off to where it would go back into the ground. So, I mean, there are all kinds of, you know, I'd be surprised if there were nothing that...
One would hope that when you're talking about something as important as fire safety and medical, you know, response, that something should be available. Otherwise, theoretically, smaller towns that could ill afford to take care of their citizenry, you know, might go without, and the citizens would suffer. So I would hope that there are grants available, but to date I haven't really heard the extent to which it's being built into this project.
Unless, again, it's a matter of the wealth of the town. It'd be interesting to find out and ask, you know, if that's, you know, maybe some of those folks can come on and speak on the show here about that and ask about that. What now you have? So what else have you learned about? Because I had heard that they were going to put an elevator in there, and then I was told that no. Was that ever part of the plan as something as expensive as that? That
I thought I had heard, you know, some months ago, but there's been modifications to this all along. So, and I can't profess to be an expert in all of this, but I had heard that there was an elevator, if nothing else, to handle equipment moves and that sort of thing. And then I also heard that because certain parts of the building weren't able to be ADA compliant, that those parts would be essentially closed off to the public. So, you know.
I think they made that upstairs. I think they're making the first floor would be open to the public.
Right. There is a room that I think is meant to serve a couple of purposes, one for training and one for, I guess, if they need to do any kind of public outreach or training to the public, they're going to be using that as well. But then again, we also have other spaces in town that I think could be utilized for this. You know, we've got a space in the library, and we've got a space over in Town Hall in the basement there.
That's right.
So, I mean, once you begin to look at things like this and say, how many nice-to-haves have been designed into this building versus must-haves? That's the kind of thing that I think if we send the message, and again, this is not a slight against the firefighters, who I support. We need them. But once you send the message at Town Hall that, hey, go back to the drawing board, make this cheaper. I mean, the other thing I haven't mentioned, Anne-Marie, there are fire stations that have been done in the vicinity of Norfolk in recent years. I looked into one that was done over in Natick. I actually just drove past it the other day. It's a very nice fire station. When I looked it up, that station was completed in 2019 for $12 million. So that's $12 million versus, you know, $22 million.
This was a renovation?
This was a complete rebuild. It's
complete rebuild.
It looks fabulous over there in Natick. I think it's a 5-bay unit. Maybe it's double wide unit, and they've got all the things they need that they don't have now, which, you know, exhaust hookups so that they can keep the fumes out.
Was it built from scratch the way ours is?
I believe it was, yeah.
Because, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I remember seeing somewhere that the spin was that, well, this building cost this then, but now this building would cost a lot more. I remember distinctly there were a couple of different fire stations. Do you remember seeing that somewhere?
I think I've heard that.
I mean, they were saying, well, if they'd done it now, it would be, even more than what we're spending. And I thought that was kind of again.
Well, I think that the unfortunate thing is we are
sell.
living in a time of inflation. This most recent year being the worst case
Yes.
of inflation that we had in a while. But inflation has a tendency to, it can often be, a period of inflation can be followed by a period of deflation, where, prices will decrease. So I think that, I want to be careful of using the word fear-mongering here.
Oh, yes.
But when we're citing things like we need to do this now because tomorrow it will be more expensive, no one has a crystal ball. And the other thing, and I think we may be running short on time, but I want to mention that it's important for people to come out for this town meeting that's happening on the 11th, because that's where we're going to be able to ask and answer, have our questions answered about this fire station, and voice our concern about the expense. And if I can say one thing almost preemptively, when I was at the town meeting to vote for police and fire back in, I think it was 2015, when it came time for the vote, after much discussion amongst the audience, all of the police filed into the back of the room and stood.
Outrageous.
And I thought that was a bit
It's
manipulative
intimidating.
on the part of the people who wanted to achieve something
I
here.
have not heard one person except you mention that.
Well, it
And I
stood very
talked to-
clearly in my mind.
I asked a couple of them, they said, yes, that's what happened.
Yeah.
What is that? What is the hell
You
is
wouldn't have
that?
seen that because it was also behind the camera. But
What's the meaning of such a thing?
And so then you have to meekly, vote if you're against something
Terrible.
like that. I still voted against it because I'm very fiscally conservative, and it didn't sound like to me at the time that everything was designed right. And look, here we are. But
Right.
my sincere hope is that something like that doesn't repeat at town meeting, where when it's time for the townspeople to vote, all the firefighters now file into the back.
Now, so we're going to vote on the 6th as to whether it should go ahead or not. Is that right?
On the 11th.
On the 11th.
Yeah.
On the 11th. But it's already on the ballot for the 28th.
It is,
What's-
and I think
well-
that they maybe have struggled with how do we get everything we need to, because you need to award a project like this, I think, within 30 days of having received the bid. So that kind of starts the clock, and then you have to come to town meeting to get it, passed by the town, and then you have early voting you have to deal with, and then you actually have the vote. So I think that from what I've heard, they've done the best that they can to line all of this up. But the important thing is to anybody, I want to say this in the time that we have. I've been campaigning at the DPW yard, and I can't tell you the number of people that don't even know about this project.
Well, see, this is
and
what...
so that's a major concern of mine. So if anybody's watching this, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, to be honest, just come out and have your voice be heard, have your questions answered at town meeting. And if I've left any kind of impression on you today, I would certainly love to have your vote vote early, vote by mail, or vote on January 28th. But I believe I'm somebody that can come in there and be a little different about, versus how it's been done in the past, And not to sling any mud here, but we have somebody who's looking to come back in to the board who was present during what I'm still calling the mismanagement of the police and fire station, and who was
Very
on the
big
board
voice.
of that time, and is that what we need in this town, or do we need somebody who's going to navigate us through these difficult waters a little bit more carefully?
Well, your point about people not knowing, it seems to be something endemic in the United States. I sometimes bring things up that I've heard about this going on TV. I say, what, huh? What do you mean? It's disturbing, and it's dangerous, this kind of ignorance. Oh, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Okay, and thank you for watching this episode of State and Local. I'm Anne-Marie Battistone, and you've been watching NCTV. My guest was Paul Burns. He's running for selectman. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.